Welcome to Signal Ahead. I'm Alfred. Today's briefing, Theory and Foundations, Physics plus Math, Saturday, July 11. This is the synthesis above the noise, not the headlines, but the deep currents beneath them. Let's get into it. Here's something you might have missed, watching the last few weeks of physics and mathematics scroll past. On one side of the field, a group of theorists announces bounds on how many microscopic quantum states a black hole can have, and the mathematical object they reach for the thing that captures the essential behavior is a random variable with a prescribed distribution of fluctuations. On the other side of the field, a mathematical physicist studies a certain deformed matrix ensemble, tuning a single coupling constant, and watches eigenvectors localize and delocalize, a mobility edge emerging, order restored to chaos and back again. These sound like utterly different enterprises. One is about the interior of a collapsed star, the other about the spectrum of a large random matrix, and yet the mathematical grammar is the same. The claim that black hole spectra should look, in a precise sense, like the spectra of random matrices, that the erratic, unpredictable dependence on the number of degrees of freedom is not a failure of our calculation, but a genuine feature of the physics, is one of the quiet through lines of the moment. That is the thing a casual reader misses. If you scan the headlines, you see quantum computing executive orders, you see a lovely result about bipartite matching landing in a complexity class it wasn't known to inhabit, you see fireworks over a shoreline. What you don't see is that a surprising fraction of the deepest current work, across gravity, across quantum chaos, across number theory even, is converging on the same suspicion, that randomness is not the opposite of structure, but a form of it. That the most orderly thing a complicated system can do is to behave, statistically, like noise of a very particular flavor. The universality of random matrix statistics, the fact that the spacing of energy levels in a heavy nucleus, the zeros of a certain function in number theory, and the microstates of a black hole all seem to obey the same distributions, is one of the strangest facts we have, and it keeps turning up in new rooms of the house. So that is where the field stands, and it is worth pausing on why this should be the theme rather than, say, a grand unification or a single decisive experiment. We are in an era where the foundations are being rebuilt from underneath, while the top floors are being renovated. Consider that even the notion of what a mathematical universe is, the collection of all types, all the objects a theory can talk about, is being reformulated. There is serious work now on directed univalence, on synthetic theories where the basic entities are not sets, but categories with a built-in sense of direction, of before and after. This is foundational plumbing of the most abstract kind, and it exists on the same continent as physicists asking whether the gravitational path integral can even resolve the individual states it is supposed to be summing over. Both are asking, what is the right language? What are we actually allowed to say? And that question, what are we allowed to say, and to whom, turns out not to be purely internal to the mathematics. Some of the most consequential arguments in the field this season are about the governance of ideas. An executive order on quantum computing that theorists felt compelled to respond to. A proposed ban on the techniques of differential privacy, which is to say, a policy fight over a piece of pure theoretical computer science that had quietly become infrastructure for how a society counts itself without exposing its citizens. There is a lesson there about the porousness of the boundary between the blackboard and the world, a theorem about how much you can learn from a database before you've compromised an individual is now a matter of national argument. The abstraction has grown teeth. Running underneath all of it is an older, almost embarrassing question that refuses to be settled. When should two rational agents agree? Half a century on from the theorem that says two people who trust each other's rationality and share their conclusions cannot simply agree to disagree, we are still working out what it means for knowledge to be common, for a fact to be not just known, but known to be known. And that recursion, I know that you know that I know, is precisely the structure that governs everything from cryptographic protocols to whether a field can even talk to the public about what it has found. So here is the argument I want to lay out over the next while. The state of theory and foundations right now is defined by three tensions pulling in productive opposition: randomness masquerading as structure, and structure dissolving into randomness. foundations being poured fresh beneath disciplines that are simultaneously reaching their most refined heights, and a discipline of pure abstraction discovering, sometimes to its alarm, that it has become load-bearing for the world outside. We'll take them in turn. But hold on to that first image, the black hole and the random matrix speaking the same tongue, because if I'm right, that shared grammar is not a coincidence. It's a clue about what the universe is made of. Let's follow it. There is a temptation, when you survey a week's worth of work at the frontier of physics and mathematics, to see nothing but scatter. A paper on black holes described as random variables. A treatise on directed univalence for simplicial objects in an infinity topos. Quantum graphs, boson stars in teleparallel gravity, unit distances between points in the plane, differential privacy and its sudden entanglement with the machinery of government. It reads like a list assembled by a lunatic or perhaps by a very well-read jackdaw, and yet I want to suggest to you that beneath this apparent noise there runs a single, rather deep current, and that once you notice it, you cannot unnotice it. Consider what a black hole and a random matrix have in common. On the face of it, nothing. One is the most extreme object gravity can produce, a place where space-time folds in on itself. The other is a grid of numbers drawn from a hat. But there is a conjecture, borrowed from the study of the zeros of the Riemann zeta function of all things, which proposes that the count of a black hole's microscopic states should fluctuate exactly the way a certain random variable fluctuates. That the erratic, order-one wobble in the spectrum of a black hole is not a failure of our theory, but a genuine feature, and that this same statistical fingerprint appears when you look at the finest structure of the primes, and again in the energy levels of heavy atomic nuclei, and again in the vibrations of a quantum graph, that curious object which is nothing more than a network of wires along which waves are made to travel. Here is the current I want you to feel. Across these wildly different physical settings, nuclei, primes, black holes, wires, the same statistics of randomness keep appearing. This is what physicists call universality, and it is one of the most astonishing facts we possess. Universality says that the fine detail of a system, the specific mechanism, the individual character of the thing, washes out at a certain scale, and what remains is a pattern that depends only on a few gross features, a symmetry here, a dimension there. The plumbing is forgotten, the shape of the water is remembered. When someone proves that the fluctuations of a random quantum graph, in the limit of a very large graph, coincide precisely with those of the classical Gaussian ensembles, they are not making a narrow technical point. They are adding another entry to a vast, still-growing catalogue of things that at bottom cannot tell each other apart. Now watch the same current run through the mathematics. Consider the Rosenzweig-Porter model, where one takes an arbitrary matrix and slowly stirs in a dose of pure randomness, dialing a knob from 0 to infinity. What happens is not a gradual smearing. It is a phase transition. There is a mobility edge, a sharp boundary in energy on one side of which the system's states are localized, trapped in place, and on the other side of which they spread out and thermalize, forgetting where they began. And there is that lovely, counterintuitive phenomenon of reentrant localization, where increasing the disorder can, over some range, push the system back toward order. The point is not the detail. The point is that the structural behavior is governed by thresholds and edges and transitions, and that the same architecture, a critical value, a qualitative change of regime, recurs whether you are talking about eigenvectors of a matrix, condensation of a Bose gas, selecting a density, or a bipartite matching problem crossing from the merely tractable into the deeply parallel. And here is where the current surfaces into the human world, which is where I most want you to attend. The mathematics of privacy, the science of adding just enough noise to a dataset that no individual can be identified, while the aggregate truth survives, is precisely a theory of the threshold. It asks, how much randomness must you inject before the signal about you personally dissolves, while the signal about all of us remains? That is a mobility edge for human beings. And when a government contemplates banning that very technique, it is, whether it knows it or not, reaching into the same deep structure that governs black hole spectra and prime numbers, and declaring that the noise shall be removed, that the plumbing shall once again be visible. That universality, which here means anonymity, the merciful blurring of the individual into the crowd, shall not be permitted. So the current is this. The most abstract fact we have discovered, that structure survives while detail dissolves, that at the right scale, nearly everything becomes a small number of universal patterns is not a curiosity for the seminar room. It is the same fact that lets a nation count itself without exposing its citizens. The scatter of the week is not scatter. It is a single idea seen from a great many angles, insisting that we notice it. And in the third part of our conversation, I want to ask what we owe that idea when it becomes a matter of policy rather than proof. There's a curious thread running through everything we've laid out so far, and I want to spend our final stretch pulling on it, because I think it tells us something about what these developments actually mean, not just for the specialists, but for anyone trying to read where the whole enterprise is heading. Consider what happens when you place three seemingly unrelated things side by side. First, a very old and stubborn combinatorial puzzle. How many pairs of points in the plane can sit exactly 1 unit apart? You would think, wouldn't you, that a question phrased in the language a schoolchild could grasp would have surrendered its secret by now. It hasn't. And the interesting part, the part worth watching, is not the bound itself, but the machinery being assembled to attack it, the careful digestion of the constructions that push the count as high as it can go. Second, place beside it a result showing that a matching problem pairing things up efficiently sits inside a class of problems that can be solved in parallel, quickly, by many processors working at once. And third, a 50-year-old theorem which says, roughly, that two rational agents who trust each other's rationality and share what they know cannot simply agree to disagree. Now, what unites these? On the surface, nothing. One is geometry, one is complexity, one is a strange little corner of decision theory that has become, over the decades, a kind of philosophical parable. But the deeper pattern, and this is the second-order implication I'd have you carry away, is that the frontier of mathematical and physical understanding is increasingly about the structure of what can be known and how fast. Not merely what is true, but what is efficiently discoverable, what can be established in parallel, what two minds can converge upon given enough shared information. These are epistemological questions wearing the clothing of mathematics. And here is where the physics rhymes with it, more than you might expect. Look at the flurry of work around black hole microstates, the notion that the count of a black hole's internal states behaves, at the finest resolution, like a random variable with erratic, unpredictable fluctuations. What's being claimed there is that even the most complete gravitational description we can write down has a built-in graininess, a limit past which the smooth semiclassical picture simply cannot resolve. The gravitational path integral, our best tool, blurs. Or consider the sobering little correction to enthusiasm over the so-called direct wave from black hole mergers, the warning that a feature people had rushed to interpret as a direct readout of horizon properties is nothing of the kind, that the correlation people thought they saw was an incidental crossing, a coincidence dressed as a law. Watch that pattern too, because it recurs everywhere. The temptation to read a clean physical meaning into a signal that the mathematics does not actually license. So what should you watch for? I'd offer three things. Watch the boundary between the knowable and the merely true. The most consequential results of the coming years will not be the ones that prove some grand statement outright, but the ones that map the cost of knowing, the parallel depth of a computation, the resolution limit of a path integral, the conditions under which agents or observers can even in principle agree. This is a quiet revolution, and it doesn't announce itself with fanfare. Watch second, the health of the tools themselves. There was, in this same span of days, an alarm raised about a government move that would ban the use of differential privacy, a mathematical technique for extracting truth from data without exposing the individuals within it. Now think about what that means alongside everything else. Here is a piece of pure theory, a precise definition of how much can be learned about a population without learning too much about any one person, and it has become the object of political action. The abstract has become the practical. When the machinery of what can be known collides with the machinery of the state, theory stops being a spectator sport. And watch third, the expository impulse, the deliberate effort to carry these ideas to a wider public, to do as the physicists have long done and make the deep results legible. Because the danger, in a field increasingly about the limits of knowledge, is that the knowledge of those limits becomes locked away in a priesthood. A theorem about when two agents cannot agree to disagree is, after all, only useful if enough agents actually understand it. What it all means then is this: the questions have turned reflexive. Mathematics and physics are no longer only asking what the world is made of, but how much of it we are permitted to see, how quickly, and at what price. That weather permitting is the signal ahead. That's the signal for today. The noise will keep coming, we'll keep finding what's underneath it. This has been Signal Ahead with Alfred. Until next time.